So the question is that this Islamophobia should we just blame Harper, and would getting Trudeau in office or Mulcair in office, would that suddenly get rid of the problem, or is it a wider problem, the system? So our first and foremost idea that we know that it's voting and just trying to get rid of him through the electoral process is not going to work is that voting is haram. And the reason is that when we look at what the vote means, what the vote means is that you're going to, as it says here on the Elections Canada website, you're going to elect a member of parliament to the House of Commons to make decisions, then pass laws on your behalf. So you, if as a Muslim, go to the polls, you're putting XYZ candidate to elect, to implement laws. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not given us the right to implement laws. We're decent people here in this room. Like we mean well, like I said, we're sacrificing our Saturday. So even if us as human beings was to devise an economic policy or political policy or foreign policy, not based on Quran and Sunnah, it's going to fail. Right? And that's the thing, is that none of these parties have something from a point of view that will succeed, because it's only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that knows best. It's only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that can devise a system. Like when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to pay zakat, why do we comply? Right? But when it comes to taxes, we try to minimize the taxes, obviously staying within the law, but try to minimize as much as possible. Some of us, when we pay our zakat, we give more, because it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who decreed such a thing. Whereas taxes, it's probably those corporations who are going to benefit from the taxes. So it's the rich people, right? That's man-made law versus Allah's law. And so Allah did not give us the right to legislate, and therefore we can't elect someone to parliament. And so therefore it's haram to vote. The other thing is that it's important to look at take a deeper look at the system as to how the system actually works, and the way the party system works. When you vote in a candidate, you're actually voting for a party, not a person. So that person is beholden to their party. So there's something called what is called a party whip. You might ask, what's a party whip? A party whip is someone whose job is it to make sure that the leader of the party's demands and vision is implemented on the party. So when Stephen Harper and Trudeau will have a whip that will ensure that their parties will vote exactly as they tell them to vote. So I'll give you an example of how this happened. So the Conservatives, they wanted to restore the traditional definition of marriage, and this is why some Muslims vote Conservative, is that he wanted to, say that marriage is between men and women, and not between men and women and women. So now you'll be surprised who vote against this bill. So as you can see with the circle, the one who voted against this bill is Omar Al-Ghabra, who's a Muslim, and who obviously, and I haven't spoke to him, but I'm sure he's a Muslim and he believes that such a relationship is haram. I'm not going to doubt his iman or anything like that. However, he has to vote as his party tells him to vote, because this is the way the system works. So he has to put his personal beliefs aside and work with the party, because the consequence of doing that, of not doing that, is he'll be thrown out of the party, and then he can't be part of the party anymore. So this is what happened to one of the MPs in Manitoba, Bev Desjardins. Her constituency was against same-sex marriage, and Jack Layton was for it, was the head of the NDP at that time. She voted according to her constituency, according to what democracy says, right? We're going to vote, we're representing the people. She got thrown out of the party. Another individual, which you might say even more relevant to us, is that he was anonymous. He wanted to vote against the war in Afghanistan. You want to stop the killing of our brothers and sisters in Afghanistan, right? However, both the Liberals and I believe the Conservatives were obviously for that war. And so when he spoke out on it, both the Prime Minister and the party whip looked at him and was like, what the hell are you doing, right? And he was forced to sit at the back for the rest of the session, and he was basically sidelined and marginalized. So this is how the system works. The system is beholden to the parties. So the question we have to ask beyond that is really who runs the show, who really sets up the parties, and who's really behind the things. And there was a study that was done in the US by Princeton over many, many years, and they studied whether the public opinion has any influence on policy. And what they found is that if you're part of a special interest group or the 1%, it did have influence on the policy. What they found is that if the rich didn't want a policy to pass, 62% of the time it would fail. If the rich wanted something, they would get it about 45%. But the interesting thing is, how do the regular people fare, like the 99%, like every one of us? When the majority of citizens disagree with economic elites or with organized interests, they generally lose. Even when fairly large majorities of Americans favor policy changes, they generally don't get it. So what it means is the rich run the show. And the reason that's important to us here in Canada is because the largest trading partner of Canada is the US. So a lot of the kind of the policies and the way the system is run depends on the US. And also, like Harper himself, he got schooled by the same sort of political consultants that actually helped the Republicans to win. So he brought a lot of that support over, and I'll go over actually how that American influence actually got him elected. So Canada really is not that different from America. The top 84 families have as much wealth as the bottom 11.4 million people in Canada. The top 84 families have as much wealth as the bottom 11.4 million Canadians. Now, 84 families can probably fit in this complex. And 11.4 million, that's like 1/3 of Canada, right? If you took like 1/3 of Canada, that's that balance. Do you think that happened by accident? Or is it because they spent $25 billion lobbying politicians to get their way? So what you saw in the US applies here as well, right? Though they didn't do this, the study didn't include in Canada, you can see that the corporations through their money are able to influence politics. So when the financial crisis happened, though everyone bragged about Canada's banking system, the reality is that Canadian banks needed to be bailed out to the tune of $114 billion. How much is $114 billion? It's 5 times the current student debt. So they could have bailed out the students 5 times over instead of bailing out the banks. Even though the students are the most productive, if you look at a student who's going into society, the most productive people are the students. They're going to buy houses, they're going to start families. And studies actually show that because they're so loaded, saddled with debt, they're not going to buy houses, right? Because how are they going to afford a mortgage if they do that? So if this group's not bailed out, how are they going to contribute to Canadian society? But that's the point. It's the 1% that rule. In terms of Harper, what enabled him to get into power was the support from corporate Canada. Corporate Canada was tired of the Liberals ruling, and the reason being, again, because they had $50 billion worth of trade going back and forth between the US and Canada. What the Liberals were doing, because of their public stance on the war in Iraq and other anti-American attitudes they were espousing, the elite Canadians were afraid their trade was being jeopardized. So they wanted to put a new party in, but the problem with the right-wing parties is that they were divided. There was 2 parties. There was the Canadian Alliance, and then there was the Progressive Conservatives. So what they threatened them is that if you do not unite, we're going to cut off your funding. As you know, elections are expensive. You know, they got to run all those attack ads, right? So without that unification forced by corporate Canada, Stephen Harper would never rose to power, because the right would always been consistently divided, and with the way the Canadian being a liberal society would continue on voting liberal. So when you look at the society, as I've been sort of discussing with you, you have the elites that support Harper, and then you also have his base, you know, the media, the National Post, and some say the Sun TV is Harper's specific mouthpiece. Then you have evangelicals, the pro-Zionists, you have the Bloc, and you have the Conservative Party. These are the factors that are actually boiling up and creating the Islamophobia. So the question is that if you get rid of Harper, will you really fix this part of society? If Harper goes and Trudeau comes, is the Islamophobia just going to magically disappear? Like, just think about that. Like, if you're someone who's been propagandized and you hate Muslims, and if you read any comments on Yahoo News when something Muslim is reported, you can find those haters out there easily. Do you suddenly think they're going to just say, oh, Trudeau's in power, I should stop hating Muslims? It's not going to happen, is it? So it's the system that's the underlying problem. And there's a lot of studies done on propaganda and media studies like manufacturing consent. We can talk more about this, but this is the way actually democratic systems really work. They work through this propaganda machine. And so voting is not going to change our situation, right? Because first of all, it's haram, and secondly, it doesn't work. It's the rich that run the situation, right? It's the rich that run the show. As you see, and there's many other examples to how the rich policies, like Harper is not just going after Muslims, he's going after environmental policy, the natives, and stuff like that. If you read any of the people who are disgruntled, like if you go to Chapters right now and try to get a book, there's like 3 or 4 books on anti-Harper books out there, like criticizing him. So it's not just us, it's the moneyed interests that have got into Canadian politics. And is that really a surprise? You're here, sacrificing your Saturday, investing your Saturday here, where you could be having fun doing something else. You're sacrificing and investing your life and your time, and may Allah reward you immensely for that, to come and fight for our interests as Muslims, to practice Islam, right? That's why you're here, right? To please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to protect the rights of Muslims in Canada, to safeguard their deen, to protect our families, right? Don't you think the rich would do the same thing? Wouldn't they spend $25 billion to influence public policy? To get Harper elected as someone who will work according to their interests? So that's the way the system works. So it shouldn't be a shock or a surprise that this is the way that's the way it is.